Hi guys, my name is Melanie Grothy. This is for my Addictions and Family Counseling class, and I am in the Human Services Generalist track for my bachelor's degree here at IRSC. For my discussion, I chose to talk about the show Breaking Bad, and I just think the first thing that popped into my head when I thought about shows that really went into detail about addiction was Breaking Bad. It really showcased all of the phases of his addiction, as well as how scary and it was just crazy to see it up close, this crazy addiction, how it turned into cooking, selling, all of it. Okay, so just to jump right in, if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, it primarily focuses on Walter White, and it starts off depicting his life as him kind of living a pretty normal life. And then he does have a kind of traumatic event which kind of starts everything off, and it's finding out that he is very, very ill. And he was actually a chemistry teacher for a high school, so he has a lot of background knowledge of drugs and what things you have to mix together to make meth and all of that kind of stuff. So as we see in a lot of families with addiction, a lot of times it can stem from a deeper issue, as we've discussed a lot in this class, how we have to look deeper into our family members. Instead of just labeling them as an addict, we're labeling them as, having a family member died and that's why they're showing these behaviors, or they lost their job and that's why they're showing these behaviors. So in Walter's case, he is showing those behaviors because he not only found out that he was sick, but he also found out how huge of a financial burden his treatment was going to be. So he began cooking meth to secure his family's future financially. But eventually his cooking of meth led to a big power problem, a big dominance problem, a big pride problem, and all of these other outside issues started to creep in. Another interesting dynamic in this show is the character Jesse. Jesse struggles with substance abuse, specifically meth, and he was actually Walter's prior student in high school. So it's a very interesting dynamic of kind of these two people who are very unlikely to be coming together are now together and cooking meth. And one of them seems like he's been an addict throughout high school and is kind of a thug, and you would think that these behaviors would be coming for him. And then the other one is Walter, who's a very clean-cut, straight guy, and he's doing this for the financial reason for his family. And in the show, Jesse shows a lot of signs of guilt throughout his addiction, and also he has a huge dependency on his addiction. It really shows him constantly taking the product that they are making and using it for himself, and there was multiple altercations between Walter and him because of this. And so you can really tell that Jesse struggles to tell himself no. It is such an addiction that he is even taking away him and his partner's own financial gain just so he can get that high and so he can continue on and feel okay. Now, the dynamic with Skylar, his wife, is what I would think to be a codependent kind of relationship, and also she tends to start to enable his addiction as he goes through it further. So if I were to be treating their family, I would probably firstly start with Skylar, since she is the closest to Walter, being his wife. I would start by setting down hard boundaries with her with what is okay and what is not okay. Making sure that she has access to his phone, making sure that she has access and knows where he is and knows, what he's doing during these times, allowing less of that sneakiness to go on in not only their marriage, but also just their household. And I would also tell her to kind of give her tools to more so talk to him about it, rather than just turning the blind, turning a blind cheek, I guess, to his behavior. And I guess that would be turning a blind shoulder. I think that's the saying, not cheek. But she tends to kind of just want to keep the peace, where in this case I think she needs to step up and be more confrontational with him about his addiction and how far it truly had started to go. Walter Jr., his son, his dynamic is that he's unaware of his father's addiction or his selling of methamphetamine, so he completely tries to keep his normalcy throughout his life and kind of just ignore anything that he may suspect is going on. He's just kind of internalizing it and staying out of it and trying to just go about his normal teenage life. So there may be a little bit of avoidance in there that I would try and get him to open up about. Now, Hank, the DEA agent in this show, I believe he's a brother-in-law of Walter. He brings in the moral law type of energy into their family, and he often kind of creates more tension to the family dynamic just because he is that law rule follower type of guy. And in this case, I would definitely talk to him about having more compassion, understanding, and probably talking to him about that he's not the bad guy. Walter's not the bad guy. He has an addiction. He has a sickness that is causing him to be this way. He has a financial burden that is causing him to act out in these behaviors. And I think that that's definitely something that he would need to view as an issue rather than turning that moral, almost hate onto Walter, but instead understanding the reason behind why these behaviors even started in the first place. There's also a character, Marie, in this story who struggles with kleptomania. I think that's how you pronounce it, the stealing disorder. And she is honestly preoccupied with her own addiction in this story. And it's interesting because it's kind of like a parallel because, Walter's over here struggling with this one side of an extreme addiction, and then she's over here struggling with her kleptomania, and, you can see the similarities, but also such differences between the two. So for overall everybody, I would want to establish setting clear boundaries and reorganizing the family dynamic to make sure that Skylar, number one, his wife, feels that she has that sense of control, but also that she has a sense of protection for herself to set those boundaries. I think she also would need to separate her emotions from Walter and being codependent, and she would need to separate his wrongdoing and his addiction from how he actually wants to treat her, and she would need to not take it personally, but rather realize that he has a problem and that he needs help. Now, when I researched some resources to put at the end of my presentation to help this family, I found a couple different routes that I could go, but after doing more in-depth research, I feel like these three would probably be the ones that I personally would feel the most comfortable using for this situation. And these would kind of help work with a lot of the barriers that I think I would face with this family, which would be a lot of pushback from the family members who are in denial, like Skylar, pushback from Walter because, he still would want to be cooking meth to provide for his family, pushback from the son who's having avoidance issues. So the first one is an addiction severity index, which is actually something that I didn't know existed until I researched it, but I think this would be really important, and it would honestly open the family's eyes to how serious Walter's addiction actually is once they could see it on paper, written down. This is how severe all of these things are, and this is an actual issue that we need to sit down and figure out. Then structural family interventions, which I kind of talked about before, the boundaries, the reorganization of the family structure, joining family therapy, all of those things. And then lastly, I would want to use cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something that I just think honestly works great in almost every situation. I think it's a very useful tool for a very wide range of issues. So I would definitely want to try that in this situation for sure. So this would kind of challenge Walter's thought process where he thinks, oh, I'm cooking meth for my family. I'm doing this to provide. I'm doing this to take off the burden of my sickness and take off the financial burden. And I would want to replace those thoughts with, this is how this is hurting my family. This is how it's affecting them. These are the issues that it's causing and all of that. So in conclusion, those are the three that I would choose to treat this. And They will also be down below typed so you guys can take a better look. Thank you so much for listening to my discussion. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.